you made a point there, which I think references someone that we both admire, and indeed has been a guest on this show, Professor Alan McFarlane, who, when we spoke, he made the case that, culture is the thing that creates technological take-up, advancement, political systems, and so anything that we look at in the modern world and the various isms that have sprouted from it, whether it's liberalism, as you just pointed out, is because these were part of the natural English settlement, and then as England and then Britain expanded its influence, these things were exported. But the ability to be able to make all of these great inventions and political ideas and the various contributions to the Enlightenment were downstream of English and British sensibilities. This is a concern of, I wouldn't just say the online right. I think there are economic liberals like Gareth Jones, for example, who's written The Culture Transplant, makes the point that culture has a long tail, and it lasts for generations. So if you have different peoples from different areas moving into countries, how economically viable they are, or the contributions they make, or the kind of businesses they even set up, is directly linked to their culture. And I suppose where am I going with this, Sam, is if we have demographic change taking place on a large scale. So you talked about 1 million Indians in the last 4 years. We've gotten large numbers of Nigerians and Pakistanis. I think we're currently at around 80% white British as a country as a whole, but that's 36% in London. Is if we're saying that political sensibilities, economic systems are downstream of culture, and we know that large numbers of peoples equals culture, then let's think about some of the other reality about whether we can move the dial on some of the immigration questions you've talked about, because we've got a Home Office that has multicultural networks. One of them is a 700-strong Muslim activist base who are trying to change Home Office policy for Muslim needs. We've even got a leader of the opposition who is proudly Yoruba Nigerian and has spoken about wanting to have more people like her around. So she wants to open those doors. I'm not saying she said that recently, but that's a paraphrase. I suppose if we are seeing different peoples advocating for their own interests and large-scale demographic change, the collapse within birth rates, here's the killer question, which everyone always intimates in a doomerist way online, which is like, Britain's finished, but in a slightly less hyperbolic tone. Is there a risk here that because of all of those factors, that in, say, 50 years' time when the demographics have changed so much, that our political institutions may well, and their economics, our culture, may look totally unrecognisable?
There's always a risk. There's always been a risk, right? Through all of history, there has always been a risk. The risk now is greater for various reasons, but the reason that we've been able to have a successful country for a millennium is because we've been very careful with it, and we've been very cautious. We've been very good at resisting invasion. As Professor McFarlane rightly identifies, one of the peculiar features of England and of Britain in general is that we've had a very high level of internal migration, like people moving from Warwickshire to London for work in the 1400s, etc., but a very low level of external migration. So high internal churn, but effectively, for most of history, very little external migration. There's a huge risk, and we're already seeing it, right? It's not that this is a prospective risk. This is something that is happening. And what we can do is we can slow it or we can reverse it, but it's already happening. And I'll give you some examples. I wrote an article at the beginning of the last general election campaign arguing that at least 4 seats would flip to Muslim independents who are campaigning primarily with an eye on the Muslim community rather than on making broad national prescriptions. Independent candidates running against the Labour Party. I was told that I was being hyperbolic, and that actually, in these communities, the Labour Party was strong, these were people who cared about social democratic ideas, etc. Guess what? Guess what happened on election night? Right? Exactly the 4 seats that I identified flipped. There are a number of others where it was run really, really close. Jess Phillips' seat in Birmingham, Hillside North, which is where Wes Streeting lives, a number of others, high-profile Labour figures, including the Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood in another part of Birmingham. Those MPs, we have already seen this in this parliament. They do not fit the ideological norms of British politics. These are people who voted for the retention of VAT carve-outs for independent schools, because Muslim schools benefit from those carve-outs. That's traditionally a right-wing idea. But they've also voted against restrictions on cousin marriage, which is not a very right-wing idea in the current political climate. The reason is that they are appealing to a particular community. Their norms align with those of a particular community. Generally, it's Pakistani Muslims in the 4 cases that we can identify here, but it's not exclusively. In East London, I encourage everybody to go away and read about Tower Hamlets and what's happening in Tower Hamlets, a borough that is now 36% Bangladeshi by origin, and where Bangladeshi patronage networks are beginning or have begun for the last decade or so to influence the way that government happens at a local level. You may be interested to know that, while Tower Hamlets is the most corrupt part of Britain, it's probably the least corrupt part of Bangladesh, right? On that cultural transfer point. Of course, its political culture is going to look more like the home country of those who've come over, because at that scale, there can be no integration. It's not like we're talking about the Huguenots here, who came to England, very small numbers, over a very long period of time, spread out very thinly, and therefore integrated. You could know, and most people listening almost certainly could not identify who was Huguenot and who was not. You could probably identify who had come to the country in the last couple of years. Right? That you probably could have a decent guess at that. And that is because we are talking about not just cultural change, but cultural transfer. Some of these communities are now so segregated from the norm in terms of not just the population and where they're living, but the services that they access. So schools becoming majority or plurality one community, healthcare services tailoring themselves to meet the needs of that community, the media markets that they're engaging with, right? A lot of the reason that I was called hysterical for predicting this big wave of Muslim independent support was that most people in the mainstream press don't interact with Muslim media. They don't engage with it, right? And nor do most Muslims in these communities engage with the mainstream media, right? We created it is a 2-pillar society. And in fact, it's more than 2 pillars. It's many pillars, some of which larger than others. It's not just, there is a tendency, I think, on the right to pick on the Muslim community. Not the case. There are now areas of the country where the Indian community, primarily Hindu, is starting to exercise serious influence over politics. In Harrow, 1922 committee chairman Bob Blackman, so the most senior backbencher in the Conservative Party, wins despite the fact that his constituency is about 55-60% Indian. And he does so by doing things like hosting rallies for Narendra Modi in London. So it cuts across a number of communities now. We are seeing, not prospectively, we are currently seeing cultural transfer from certain other countries to this country as a result of mass migration. It will get worse if, first of all, if the immigration wave continues, but secondly, if we don't sever that link between immigration and citizenship, or indeed that vote between Commonwealth citizenship and voting. Those 2 links will help to drive and deepen that change pretty rapidly over the next couple of years.